Great. Hey, thanks everybody for joining. We just want to get started here. I think you probably saw the poll that came up on the screen. We recognize that we've got a lot of people joined today from all kinds of different industries, companies, different positions. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. We'll share the results at the end of the webinar. But thank you for joining, and welcome to our webinar today about leveraging technology in a safe return to the workplace. My name is Jeff. I work with Density.io. If you're not familiar with our company, Density is a 100% anonymous, real-time, and accurate people counting technology. We're used by leading workplace and real estate teams to make data-driven decisions about their real estate portfolio in the workplace during volatile times and also during normal times. And most recently, we've been really helping people a lot with managing safe occupancy in rooms. I'm joined here by Matt Harris of Envoy. We love Envoy, and we share a lot of customers. We actually use Envoy Protect at our manufacturing facility in Syracuse, New York, to help us keep the workplace there safe. And I always look forward to talking to you, Matt, because you bring this really interesting technical and engineering background to the workplace. So it's always a pleasure to meet with you. So love to hear a little bit, maybe you can make an introduction for yourself and also about Envoy and Envoy Protect.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. Good morning. Always love to be doing things with Density as well. We're big fans as well. I'm Matt Harris, and I'm our head of workplace and technology at Envoy. Most people know Envoy for our visitor management product, which is iPads at the front desks of lobbies in offices around the world. We've been doing that for a number of years, but more recently expanded into cover much more of the workplace. And so that's everything from managing a delivery room to your conference rooms to now managing the safe and healthy return of employees back into the workplace. That's what Envoy Protect is all about. My team really is focused on how do we build out our own workplace to be as effective as possible and provide the tools and systems for our employees. And what's interesting now, of course, is with no one in the physical office, we've shifted even in my team to think about how do we provide those tools and systems that are effective for folks who are working from home. So it's been a really interesting time with the pandemic, and just today, actually, very excited that we have launched Envoy Protect out of beta, so it's generally available, and hit 1 million safe entries by employees last week from our beta users over the last couple of months. And so it's been quite an interesting time, but great to be here and happy to talk about this really exciting stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, and obviously Matt and I will be sharing our perspectives, in terms of technology and the safe return to work. But we're also joined by so many of you. Please, there's a comment box there if you want to chat with us and ask some questions, some comments, some insight. We hope to have 15 minutes at the end that we can go through that as well and make this a little bit more interactive. But just to kick things off, I mean, this is sort of the classic question, and we all love to talk about it, but sort of like the pre-pandemic, the pandemic, and the post-pandemic. Everyone likes to stare into the crystal ball, but Envoy's done a pretty incredible job of really responding to the pandemic with a whole suite of solutions that are helping people return to the office safely. Have you seen an uptick in interest because of the pandemic? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, the pandemic has forced us to really shift the way that we're thinking about how our products are used. And so I would say, uptick is maybe not the right word. I would say it's been a shift in how people think about bringing some of these technologies into their workplace. So, previously, before the pandemic, we were really focused on how do we get visitors in and out of the doors of our workplace. Now people are really focused on how employees coming in and out. And what's interesting is that essentially companies are now treating employees as visitors, right? They look very similar now. We're asking them similar types of questions. We want to make sure that we know who's in the space and who's not. So there's been a tremendous uptick in interest from that perspective for sure. And we actually had a pretty tremendous quarter last quarter, as we've helped companies make that shift. So for us, the interest is in, or what we're hearing from customers is that, number one, how do we maintain a healthy and safe space? But then number two is really, how do I use that technology to make decisions about the future, this uncertain future? And I think that's been the other real kind of growth sort of pivot in how we're thinking about how our products, really apply in this space, is that by bringing all this data into one place, and we combine that with other data too, right? We bring in density data, we have density sensors on our workplaces as well, and bring in access control systems and all of those things into the same place. Now workplace leaders are able to make decisions in a much more effective way.
Yeah, and I think like you're hearing about that, it sounds almost like a similar trajectory during the pandemic. I mean, pre-pandemic, density has always been focused and a strong believer in data as sort of a fundamental aspect of informing real estate workplace teams about both from a planning aspect, how to manage the real estate portfolio and decisions around workplace, but then also with real-time data, how to actually put that data into the hands of users, employees, so that they can navigate the workplace more effectively, have a better experience. So I think that's always been our focus. And then when the pandemic came across, all of a sudden it was like a lot of more people were interested in the data from a planning perspective, because the environment's just so volatile and everyone's experimenting with so many different ideas. And then from a workplace experience aspect, there's all of the interest became sort of health related questions. How can we empower employees to make choices about their health, or inform them about to make healthy choices?
Well, and your new product, Safe by Density, is really interesting because it puts and we put these on our the restrooms at our workplaces, just because that was kind of we realized one of the most obvious places where too many people can be in a small space at the same time, which creates an unhealthy, unsafe space. You're now actually taking real-time entry information about a specific space, and instead of going into a dashboard that an admin is looking at occasionally, you're literally putting it on a screen outside the door, and you're saying, hey employees, here's the number of people that are in this space right now, here's how you can be a part of like solving this challenge of creating a safe space together. And I thought that was really interesting. Maybe you can talk about how also you at Density made that shift.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example. So so when the pandemic happened, it was like all of a sudden there's all of this interest more than ever about, we need to know exactly how many people are in this space. And this was anything from meatpacking factories to break rooms and in manufacturing facilities to cafeterias and technology spaces or gyms. And it was interesting because the question always came up. People said, is this how are we going to enforce this? Are we going to have sort of COVID cops monitoring this? And like, what is this going to look like? And, pretty quickly, we came to the conclusion that, the real answer, particularly in a workplace environment, isn't about enforcement. It's about empowerment. You want to, employees are going to feel best if they're making decisions around their own health. And so that's where, within a couple of weeks, we just took density data. We could put it on any sort of iPad, digital display, stick it out in front of a space like a restroom or a cafe or a gym, and tell an employee, it's safe to go in, or wait maybe 2 minutes, because that's on average how long it'll take until it's going to clear out again. And that kind of empowerment is, people responded well to that. And again, restrooms, cafeterias, gyms were all these places that people had a lot of interest, because there's a lot of anxiety about how to manage those spaces.
I think that's a really great shift to one that is more focused on open communication with employees. I think that's certainly a takeaway for workplace leaders in this post-pandemic world, is that sharing this information and being upfront and also thinking about how to effectively communicate that information. This is data that can be fairly complex in a lot of cases. And one thing that we've done, we found over the last year, this is both pre and post pandemic, but showing data to our employees, as you say, allows them to feel more empowered and make decisions that are good for them and good for the company. Now they're able to make make those safe decisions on the return to work. I think it's just as you point out, it's a great extension of the work that had started, but now this has got to be front and center for workplace leaders, HR teams, wherever you might fit in the organization, right? Workplace has a tendency to be, maybe you're under the CFO, maybe you're connected closer to the HR team, but more than ever, it's got to be as cross-functional as possible, right? Because it's about how do we communicate effectively and have it's all tied together in a new way now.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I think kudos to everyone who's on this webinar. I just sort of the intensity of the planning, the difficulty of the environment, the complexity of the problems. Sometimes I look on the problems that workplace and real estate professionals are sort of trying to solve right now, and they seem like the most difficult business challenges ever. It's really hard.
Total unknown, absolutely.
These cross-functional teams are just pulling in people from across the organization for their input. I mean, it's been a huge journey. It's been kind of a privilege to hear a little bit about that planning and to try to assist. So that's been nice. I think one theme that comes up often is sort of this question around the perception of safety, and again, this is sort of like the empowerment of employees, but how important the perception of safety is versus systems that you put in place that actually create the safety. And our position on this is that both are important. You need to put those measures in place, but you also need to make sure that employees know that they've been put in place. I'm curious a little bit from one of the areas of focus a lot when I get in conversations, it's always like the lobbies and like that first experience when you think about that sort of perception. And this is one place that Envoy really shines, because like you are, for a lot of people, their first experience, whether it's a visitor or if it's an employee coming back to the workplace after being gone for a while. Talk about that a little bit, like about how Envoy. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, that has been that's our bread and butter, right? Is that front door experience, making sure that first step that you take into a workplace is, feels comfortable, now that it feels safe and it feels healthy, and that it feels like you're being welcomed, right? And so, we said from the beginning when we started building out Envoy Protect, we said we don't want this to feel like you're at the airport going through TSA and having to take off your shoes and put your stuff in a metal detector and all of that. There are really important things that need to happen along the way into as you enter a workplace now, but we can do it in a way that feels much more comfortable, much more like a partner. So we always thought of Envoy Protect as like, this is your kind of friendly companion that's helping you get into the workplace safely. And then as you walk in the space, certainly there's physical things that help to support that. So markers on the floor, having sanitation stations, right? And hand sanitizer when you get off at critical points, get off the elevator, get into the front door, at the lobby desk. Thinking about the iPad itself, we rolled out touchless sign-in. So even visitors that are coming in, scan the QR code with your phone, and now you aren't even touching the iPad on the front desk, you're doing it on your phone. It's a pretty similar experience, but even just that difference is a really strong communication to either the visitor or the employee that, hey, we've thought about all of these things. Even the touching the iPad walking into the door, we don't want to add that risk. And so I think what we've certainly talked to and heard from a lot of our customers about is they love that technology allows you to create a welcoming experience back into their workplace that is still safe and healthy, right? That because technology makes it much more seamless, because you can do things like health questionnaires, at home before you even go into the office. You're not having these kind of gates that you have to go past. It can still feel pretty comfortable and welcoming along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, this is a little bit of a different topic, but we look at all these changes that we've made during the pandemic and all of this interest right now, and also what I'm seeing is there's a lot of planning that's happening for post-pandemic. Like, what do you think the next 4 to 6 months is going to look like? And I'll give you my perspective as well.
Yeah.
And then even beyond, what does this look like a year from now?
The $1 million question, right? Or maybe more than that in the startup world. No one knows for sure, certainly. We know that a lot of media publications and folks have been decrying the end of the office, right? That we're going to a 100% remote future, and no one's going to want to go back to the office. We actually think that the office is still a pretty valuable place, and is a really important place for especially for collaboration and socialization, but it's also important for people to have a separation between their home and their work. And so that workplace is definitely not going away. So we do think that it's coming back. I definitely think that people are going to go back to workplaces. But what I think is going to change is workplaces are going to look different. And the amount of time that you spend in that place and how you spend that time is going to look different. And so, one other thing that we did today, in addition to launching Envoy Protect into general availability, was we also launched the beta of desks. So Envoy Desks is now a way to manage all of your workstations that are around your space. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's going to change. I don't think we're going to have as many assigned, workstations. We're not going to have people coming in every single day to sit around, shared desk spaces. It's going to be more dynamic. And for workplace leaders, it's going to be a lot harder, because I think historically, managing a workplace has been relatively consistent in terms of you can predict with pretty good regularity how many people are going to be coming in each day, even how many visitors are coming in each day, when contractors are coming in, all of that. How many people do I need to provide lunch for? How many rooms do I need to have for meetings? All of those things. It certainly fluctuates, but it's generally consistent. And as a workplace leader, I can expect that what happened last week is going to look pretty similar to what happens this week. I think in the post-pandemic world, and especially before we have a vaccine and everything is kind of resolved, I think every day is going to look different, and every week is going to look different. You're going to have a completely different set of people that are in each day. They're probably going to be maybe coming into the office fewer than 5 days a week. And so you start to look at much more of a hybrid environment. And I think if you have a much more hybrid environment where not everyone's coming in every day, then you have to look at how you're using the physical space. We all know that real estate is very expensive. In most cases, it's the number 2 cost behind people for most companies. And most people can't get it out of their leases right now. So you still have this space. And the question is, how do we make that space the most effective space possible? Maybe I can remove some desks because I now have a tool like Envoy Desks that can help me to manage that a little bit more dynamically, and use more spaces that are focused on different types of activity-based working zones, like socialization, collaboration, maybe open working spaces instead of dedicated workstations.
Yeah, I think.
What do you think?
I mean, it's always wonderful to talk about this, and it's such a changing environment. I think from Density's perspective, we've always been strong believers that buildings, which typically are the second most expensive thing that companies spend money on, the market wants more data. Like, we want to know how these buildings are being used so we can make better decisions, because the decisions are so big and consequential. So we've always been focused on that question. How many people in an entire building, a specific floor, what percentage of workstations are being utilized? Those conference rooms, what's the utilization of the conference rooms look like, so you can make better decisions around those. And then all the applications of the real-time data, like do I need to go to the cafeteria right now, or is it too busy? So all of those things existed pre-pandemic, and I'd say, currently, as I said, there's more interest in that type of data for both planning and real-time uses because of the pandemic. But I think that in the next 4 or 6 months, and then hopefully beyond, as we return to the workplace and things like this, I don't think it's going to go away. Like, I think the expectation is going to be that real estate workplace teams will be expecting that they have that data. It's not something they have to go out and search for or try to compile from a bunch of different sources. They're going to be more, it's going to be more readily available. And I think employees, in terms of their experience, are going to be used to having that information available and more of a friendly environment in terms of, whether it's wayfinding or finding an available conference room or an available desk. I think we're going to expect more. So I don't think we're turning back. I think it's a little bit of a phase change in terms of how people interact with buildings.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that point about real-time data or what I would even call like midterm or like short-term data is also really interesting, and is going to be a big shift because I think when you look at typically when people are thinking about people counting specifically, it's actually for longer term trends and bigger picture kind of let me understand how do I plan the use of my space when I'm signing the next lease, how many more square feet or fewer square feet do I need? That sort of things. A lot of longer term decision making. And what I have always loved about density actually is that real time component of being able to see what's happening right now, or in my case, what happened yesterday or maybe last week, and be able to adjust. We would actually adapt the usage of our space based on how spaces within our workplace were being used week to week. One thing that we always loved to do was rearrange furniture because we were trying to find the best sort of environment for what our employees wanted to collaborate effectively, right? And we like to think of, I hire a designer and we come up with a floor plan and we put all the furniture in a place and we put all the rooms in a place, and then it's sort of set. But it turns out with that shorter term data and things like movable couches, privacy couches, movable tables, plant wall barriers instead of built wall barriers, you can shift that. In some cases, day to day, week to week, month to month. Do you find that that is also something that people are asking for more with that density data that you can provide?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting just in terms of the we definitely have a number of projects right now where look, like when you're experimenting, you don't want to be spending money without measuring it. I mean, you want to make sure that you're actually measuring the outcomes of these experiments. And right now we're just in a world where there's a lot that's being done in terms of transitions of the workplace to Agile. We've talked to some people who are going like 100% from assigned seating to Agile across huge numbers of work points. And that's a big jump to make. And so that's where the data becomes really important. So we have seen that where a lot of the experimentation, if you're going to be making these experiments, we want to measure it and we want to be providing insight so that you make sure that you can do it. I mean, all of these standards that we had around, sort of marketing on the web with A/B testing and things like this, it's possible in the physical space. You can have two different layouts and see exactly how they perform and what's more popular and what's not. And it takes the guesswork out of it. So we've seen a lot of interest there as workplace teams are trying to rethink the workplace and how they're setting it up.
Yeah, I love that. It's like that shift that, to we've learned all of these things about how to use data in software and in products and in the virtual world. Certainly, the physical world has not really caught up in the same way. Certainly, smart homes are quite prevalent now, but offices are still lagging far behind in most cases. And your point is so good. And I think for everyone on the call, I mean, we should all be asking that question. How are we using the data? What data do we have about our workplaces? And especially as we return, what data do we need to collect? And I think for a lot of people, you might look at your workplace and say, we don't maybe have the technology that we need in place to collect those data. Maybe we have some of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we need a little bit more. And I think that, starting from, this return to the office post-pandemic gives you this opportunity to really zoom out and look at your space and say, okay, what do we need to kind of put in place? You have a bit of a pause point here, which is really nice. And then the technology is there. I mean, as you said, we've figured this out, for the most part. These are just, I always tell people, like, installing density sensors on your front doors is almost a no-brainer because the data is just so obvious and so useful. And you can get it done quickly, and I think we obviously think that the same about Envoy products, but there's this growing suite of kind of obvious, almost table stakes technology that I think we should all be having in our workplaces.
I mean, do you have any examples of customers or stories you can tell of customers that maybe pre-pandemic weren't thinking about this very seriously, and that you engaged with, and you think that now with the Envoy Protect and some of the ways that you're helping manage that experience are probably not looking back, even post-pandemic to where they were before?
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, we have a, one of our biggest customers is working with us closely on the Envoy Desks rollout. And similar to what you described, they are shifting completely from an from an assigned desk approach to an unassigned desk approach, with a full hot desking solution coming back in. And they previously were very resistant to that idea, because what employees were saying was, I want my space. It's almost sacred. And everything is just, for them, everything had kind of flipped on its head, that we don't have that luxury anymore. And I think initially there was a lot of fear there. I think they wanted to make sure that the experience was really, really great for employees, because we have to remember that from the employee perspective, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in all of this, right? And even just going back to a workplace, even with all the safety precautions, there's so much that, questions that can come up. And so for them, it was, I can't share who it is yet, but they're a large company with offices around the globe. For them, it was, how do we create a really great experience for the employees so that they feel comfortable doing that? That's a big shift. That's a kind of monumental shift in terms of how you think about assigning and using space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can think of one customer that we have where similar story, where they're really adopting sort of an agile approach, using the pandemic as an opportunity to actually build out a space, and then density to measure exactly how it's going to perform once people return to the office place, just to get some of those hard answers about what that's going to look like. So that's been very, a pretty strong trend that we've seen across a few different customers.
Yeah.
I'd love to, we're seeing a couple of questions trickle in here, but I'd love to see if some of our attendees have some questions or comments that they could add to the chat box here, and we're happy to see if we can address them, or also some of the opinions that you may have out there.
Yeah, and I see one that came in about all of this almost onslaught of data and content that's being released about a safe return to the office. How do we break through all that noise and try and make good decisions around technology in the workplace? I think that's such a good question, because it is very true. There is no shortage of material out there, and to some extent, that is part of our new job, I think, as workplace leaders, is to get out there and see what others are doing and read what we can. But I think the big thing in my mind is that, and this was really helpful for me, and I know it has been for a couple of our customers, especially thinking about desks, is look at your floor plan. The floor plan is a great starting point. And we did an exercise with our team where we pulled out the floor plan of our San Francisco HQ, and we basically just drew all over it. We identified areas where there could be better areas for collaboration and socialization. We thought, okay, now what are what are the physical changes we need to make? What are the technology changes we need to make? How would we measure the success of making that change? We looked at our, at our front doors and our exit doors. We looked at the security guard station downstairs in the front entrance of the workplace. And then we actually did an exercise, kind of internally thinking about what is it all the way back to, the breakfast table for an employee and what that experience looks like. And as you lay out those various kind of pieces along the story, it's really kind of an anthropology exercise, to be honest. Then you identify, well, these are the places where I need to go and find more information about, maybe it's about the technology solutions that work there. I think every workplace is different, but I think that is, that can allow you to focus in terms of finding maybe what the right technology solutions are for you. We've posted all sorts of things about technology solutions that should be a part of your workplace. I think touchless technology and badgeless door entry, is one of those. People counting technology like density is hugely critical. And then all of the aspects of Envoy Protect, which is about health tracking, health questionnaires, contact tracing, and understanding who's in and out of the space. I think if you look at your space physically, those three things will certainly rise to the top.
I mean, I think that's super useful with the floor plan and to identify those spots. And another thing that I've heard, there's some consultants that we have worked with often, this comes up commonly, where they'll actually think about the employee experience from basically waking up to, actually like returning to work and all of the steps involved and actually going home. I mean, the entire journey, and just identifying sort of the opportunities at each moment to make that experience as positive as possible. And so really thinking about the employee experience. And I thought that was a really wonderful approach. And it also forces us all to think outside of the box a little bit. Like, I mean, in all honesty, we exist at a time right now where we should know how busy the lobby of a building is before we go down there and stand in line. Like there's no reason. Yep. There's no reason we should be going down and queuing up. Like this should be something that we know ahead of time. Also, or the teams that are managing the groups of people that are coming in and they're struggling with decisions like how you're breaking up the workforce and things like this. They should have the data to understand how that's actually performing. That policy they put in place, does it mean that the lobby's getting too busy? Does it mean that the elevators are getting too choked up? I mean, all of those things, we exist in a world now where we should have the information around that. And I think following the employee experience can be a great way to sort of discover those little, those opportunities right there.
Yeah, that I love that as a future KPI of like we should never have to wait in line anymore. We should have the data to not have to wait in line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a hugely noisy space in terms of the return to work and all the technology. And again, it's such a difficult problem. There's so many different ways to come in there that we do see a lot of different technologies on the density side. So things that come up often in conversations that I'm having with our customers or with people that are interested in our technology, there's been a huge focus on access control, obviously, and touchless access control, because teams want to know, not just the has everybody badged in, but sort of the who of who's arriving and how you integrate that data with other systems. Or the other ones, obviously, there's a huge amount of interest around some of the temperature scanning and some of those technologies, which,
yep.
I'd say like one thing that comes up a lot is that there was a lot, I was seeing a lot of technologies that were coming up that never existed before the pandemic. You just want to be really careful and test these things and make sure that they actually work and actually make sure that you understand what problems that they're solving. Yep. Because I did see, unfortunately, a lot of sort of fly-by-night stuff that was just sort of popping up out of nowhere. And so, it was such a noisy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think people just sort of need to proceed with caution, make sure you test things, the value that you're getting out of it, the problems that you're solving with it.
Well, and the temperature sensing is actually an interesting example because ironically, what is happening in some places are, you're putting a temperature sensing station at a front entrance, and that's causing yet another queue. right? And now you've got people who haven't been checked, and now they're having to stand, oh, hopefully 6 feet apart, but even there's a risk, right? And so by adding that, you've created another risk point. If you aren't looking at this really holistically, then you're going to say, oh, we need to have temperature scanning. How do you, if you need temperature scanning and you decide that you do, how do you do that in a way that then doesn't add a whole set of other risks by requiring people to queue up or interact with a device or with another human? And so in fact, we've actually seen therefore a lot of companies not implement the temperature screening simply because they'd much rather have those employees check their temperature or attest to their health symptoms before they even arrive, and then also avoid any issue of potentially creating another queue.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. Yeah, and I mean those intake processes seem like they're all so varied and different. Like the how of how people are entering the building and how different companies are managing that is I mean, it's varied across geography and state and industry. So I know that like Envoy had some interesting integrations with some of these other technologies. I just see a question here about access control because obviously in the people counting world, access control oftentimes is sort of the de facto. It might be the place where everybody goes to try to figure out how much a building's being used, even though it's not necessarily very accurate. You have to beg it from the security team, and you don't get exit. So there's challenges with it, but tell us a little bit about that. Like some like access control, is that important in terms of Envoy and how you're seeing this return to work?
Control is huge. It's huge for two reasons. One, because I think the data is important, and I think it also increases that communication with a wider group of folks. Certainly, the security team, which I think, to your point, has accurately been maybe in some cases kind of thinks about security separately from a lot of what we're talking about, and this has kind of forced the conversation to come together. So bringing the data and the systems integrated into a platform like Envoy really allows for that conversation to happen. But in the context of returning back to a safe and healthy workplace, access control gives you an extra bonus in that you get a very strong motivator to individuals to follow a process. So in our case, in Envoy, you can tie your access control system into Envoy Protect, and employees don't have their door access enabled until they have gone through your process. So they do that health attestation, they register to come into the workplace. If you're over capacity, they can't come in, they're denied entry, or there may be other reasons why they can't come in that day. They might be limited by a time of when they can enter, some of those things. Then when they arrive and they sign in after all of those checks have gone green essentially, then the access control integration turns on their access. So their badge becomes activated, or if they're using a phone, maybe their phone access becomes activated. And when they leave at the end of the day, same thing, that is now removed. And so a lot of people ask, how do I make sure that my employees are following this process? I think 90% of my employees are, they're going to do it anyway. They really support this stuff. But the other 10%, they're either going to forget, or they're maybe not going to care, or something like that. Well, there's one answer, and I think it's really, really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, from the density standpoint, when it comes to access control, this is a very common story with us. Is we'll deploy density in a building, and then we'll collect data for a couple of days, and the customer will come back to us and say the data is wrong. And we'll say, well, why do you think this? They said, well, because it's saying that there's 30% more people in our building than our access control system says. And I say, and then usually the response is like, well, density data is actually right. Make sure you study what's going on with the access control system, because it's not atypical. And this was sort of pre-pandemic to see a huge number of people actually coming in. So a lot of times, density data can solve that issue with access control just by giving everyone insight into actually what's happening with people count. And so that's one way that we've basically been tied in with access control systems like that.
There's no one magic bullet here in terms of data. You kind of need to look at a variety of data sources, and what I think is great about these integrations is that the data can come together, so you don't have to go to multiple different systems to look, but no single system is going to be 100% accurate. Density, I think, is like 99.7% accurate, which is I'm pretty sure is best in class. And so that is crucial. But layering on things like access control numbers, information from visitor management, right? So from Envoy, information from Wi-Fi usage or some of these other systems that you can use, that gives you a much richer picture about what's going on in your workplace. And if we go back to what we've kind of been talking about this whole hour, that workplace leaders need to have a better understanding of what's happening day to day in their workplace. It is really important to bring these various data points together and look at them holistically.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like there's a couple other questions in the QA box here. Here's a question. In the years of usage data, does Density provide customers a best-in-class configuration for how best an office space or conference room should be used? I guess this is a moving target during the pandemic. So, this is a great question. And actually, all of our customers' data is private. We don't expose, customer data. That said, we do have quite a bit of data about how corporate real estate is typically used. And we do aggregate some of that data anonymized to look at trends, like what the average conference room size is. And so we've done some reports like that. So, insights like, 42% of meetings in conference rooms are meetings of one is hard data that we have, based off of, 10,000 hours of conference room data. And some of that benchmark data is super useful. I think the pandemic's a great example because, one of the things that we always point out is, everything always changes. And that's why it's always good to always be collecting data. And it's why temporary space studies, don't quite address the need because, you're only capturing a slice of time. And really what workplace and real estate teams need, we believe, is data all the time. Whether they're collecting some of that data from Envoy in terms of visitors and vendors and who's arriving when, and then also density in terms of actual people count. But yeah, that benchmark data is really helpful. It's also something that our customer success team often works with a lot of our customers on to show them some of those trends and help them understand how their space is being used. Did you see this question here about desks? It says, thank you for adding desks. This is very helpful. I'm wondering if this new product allows for identifying accessible desk office or desk's office.
Assuming that we're talking about so identifying which desks are available for individuals who need accessible spaces. I don't know if that is in the initial version, but I think that the goal with desks is to surface to employees what spaces are available where, and allow you to reserve the appropriate ones. And we've heard over and over, I'm sure you all know, you can't allow everybody to be 100% hot desking. There are some individuals that are going to need a reserved space. Maybe it's your finance team or your HR team. It needs to be in a place where their computer monitor isn't showing salaries of everyone to your entire lunchroom, right? And similarly, individuals who have specific needs. So I think that is definitely part of the plan, and that's coming. And I would encourage you to visit the Envoy website, sign up for that beta. The best way to inform product is to join a beta and give feedback. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking it.
That's great. Well, I think we're kind of getting close to the end here. There's a couple more questions we could certainly address if we have a couple more minutes. So Matt, this one looks like it's for you. Matt, what were your success metrics for your internal exercise of how you measure success for space changes? So, when you made those space changes, how did you know that they're the right ones?
Great question. And it's really a combination of both automated and manual data collection, and then iterating and tracking that data over time. So most specifically, what we did is for each area where we were having experimental furniture changes, we tracked how many people were in the space at every time of the day. And we figured that the strongest indicator of a preferred arrangement is people voting with their feet, right? So just looking at that number was a starting point. And there were some cases where there were some furniture layouts that literally for a week, no one used it. And that was a very strong indicator to us. We use that as the starting point. We would do every week, we would make a change, and then we would measure the usage change with the assumption that week to week, it was roughly equivalent in terms of how many people were kind of candidates to using the space. Once we had a couple of hypotheses about why different setups were working better than others, then we did little interviews. We would literally just walk in to those spaces, ask if the 4 or 5 people sitting there had 5 minutes, ask them 2 or 3 questions. Why do you like this better? Why do you like that better? A couple of those things, and that really solidified our hypotheses. And then that allowed us to, in some cases, say, all right, this is what we think our semi-permanent solution for this space is going to be, and then start an experiment in another area.
That's great. Here's one more question right here, and maybe we'll just wrap with this one because I know we're up against the time here. Just a question about RFID badge swiping, and for those teams that think that that data is sufficient, how do you take the conversation to a place where they care more about real-time data of occupancy or visitor management from your standpoint? I'd say what happens oftentimes is we are a very accurate way of counting people, and if we get installed somewhere where badge data is the standard, we're going to open up a can of worms. So what's going to happen right away is the security team is going to realize how many people are coming through without badging. And that's going to create its own set of changes that may or may not be, something they're interested in having happen. But I think the other thing that's going to become important is you'll see the real estate team basically now have data that they don't have to borrow and beg and have the security team anonymize before they can actually even use it. They'll have it at their fingertips right away. So usually we just provide a sample, give them an idea about what kind of information will be available, and see if there's interest.
Add on to that I think post-pandemic, the accuracy is so much more important than it was in the past. I think the resolution is important because, previously if your occupancy count was off by 10 or 15% because of tailgaters, that maybe wasn't that critical of an issue. It was a security issue, certainly, but now it's a health and safety issue, right? If you are over capacity, and especially in these early phases as people are returning to the office, you're trying to keep your office to 25, 20% capacity. When you go over that, and we're talking about maybe it's a 5%, error rate at that point, you're creating an unsafe space for your employees. So I think it's really important to think about how are you getting the most accurate data. Density is a part of that equation, and I think that's the question to ask. If you think you can get 100% accurate data from your badge reader, and you can guarantee, for example, that everyone also badges out when they leave your door, and everyone badges in and no one's tailgating, then that's probably fine. But I've never seen that as accurate as you need for this new world of creating a health and safety workplace.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. And thank you to everyone for joining. Really appreciate your interest and time. We'll follow up afterwards. And certainly if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Matt or myself. We're happy to continue the conversation offline. This is my contact information. So Jeff, and I've got a funny spelling for my last name, but you can find me at density.io and Matt at Envoy.
Note, reach out. Thanks, Jeff. It's been great. And thanks everyone for joining.
Okay, take care, everybody.